Wicked for Good was one of my most anticipated movies of this year, and I just watched it after an entire year of waiting. What did I think? Well, let's go over what I think about the first movie before we get into this one. As embarrassed as I am to admit, I used to hate musicals. I used to hate live theater. I was the complete opposite of a theater kid a couple of years back. But something changed within me when I joined my school's theater group. I was curious to try it, and I gave it a shot, and what do you know? I was changed for good, and now I'm very passionate about musicals and live theater. I've acted in one, and I've built a set for one. And I feel like I'm going to continue loving theater many years into the future. And I have my theater class to thank for that. And I have them to thank for me getting into these movies. Just about a year ago, I gave the first Wicked a chance. I was still easing myself into musicals, and this one looked interesting. It got good reviews, people really liked it, so I thought, yeah, maybe I'll try it. And holy crap, this movie completely defied my expectations. It was absolutely fantastic. The music was amazing and extremely memorable, the characters were charming and really investing, and the story was really solid, and for a movie that's 2 hours and 40 minutes long, it was really well paced. I had an amazing time with the movie, and honestly, my only problems with it really just boiled down to its visuals and direction. Easily the most glaring issue with part 1 was the lighting. The lighting was absolutely atrocious and made certain scenes way too bright on the eyes. The color grading was also not the best, like it made certain colors not pop as much as they could, and the direction in certain sequences made it feel kinda aimless. Characters were just kinda wandering around, doing nothing while they sang, and it didn't feel super creative, especially for a musical. But really, outside of all of that, everything else was fantastic. The characters, the story, the costume design, the set design, everything won me over in the end, even if the movie kind of looked like shit. So, did Wicked for Good at least live up to the previous movie? If you are well versed in theater knowledge, you will know that part 2 of the Wicked musical is often considered the weaker part. People see it as messy, rushed, and much inferior to the previous one. With that in mind, though, I still went into this with an open mind, hoping that maybe the directors fixed the problems that the original musical's second act had. Well, did they? Nope. Pretty much every problem people had with the story of Act 2 is present in its adaptation, and that really hinders the movie. And overall, I'm sorry guys, but it just wasn't that good. Okay, maybe that's a bit harsh. There is still plenty of really good stuff to keep it from being a bad movie, but there's also plenty holding it back from being a masterpiece, unlike the original. Let's get into that. Like I said beforehand, there's still plenty of really good stuff in this movie to kinda keep it afloat. Like the first hour or so of it was actually really enjoyable and gave me hope that maybe they did in fact fix the problems with Act 2. But once Dorothy gets introduced to the story, that's when it begins to fall apart. Again, don't get me wrong, this is still a very enjoyable film. There are still plenty of great things to say about it. The costume design and set design are still outstanding, the music is still great, and Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo's performances are still amazing, as expected. Elphaba and Glinda's side of the story is still investing throughout, even during the messier parts, and has some strong emotional moments like in the original. Also, much like the original, unfortunately, the lighting is still atrocious, with not only some scenes being too bright, but also some being a bit too dimly lit. I really wish they fixed that, especially since that was the biggest complaint with the original film. Once the story tries to connect itself to the original Wizard of Oz, that's when it gets messy. Many of the moments and elements from the original Wizard of Oz actually feel more like background elements that are rushed through, as if they're not important to the story at all, which they unfortunately are. The way in which they quickly gloss through the story beats from the Wizard of Oz make them feel like very unnecessary additions that, if anything, just feel shoehorned in. By the second half of the film, everything just feels really messy and in some instances really rushed through. The movie is moving really fast and trying to get through a lot of material, and some of it just gets glossed over. Like the connections to the Wizard of Oz, which again, feel really unnecessary, even though they are unfortunately important to the story. The film is just forcing itself to connect to the original story, and that unfortunately throws off the entire movie. The one thing that I was confident would be good in this movie is the music, and I can confirm the movie does deliver on this front. There are plenty of great songs and musical sequences in this movie, though they unfortunately kind of live in the shadow of the previous film since none of them quite reach the same heights as some of the best tracks from that film. And they're not quite as memorable, you know, like with the original film, I was humming a lot of the tunes from that one, but with this one, none of them really stuck out to me quite as much as the previous ones, not even No Good Deed, which was the best sequence in the entire movie. Songs like Popular, Dancing Through Life, The Wizard and I, and of course that earth-shattering performance of Defying Gravity stuck with me a lot longer than some of the songs from this movie, which again are good, but not quite as good as the ones I just mentioned. The final song of the movie, For Good, is a lot more melancholic and soft when compared to the epic, impactful final song of the previous film, acting more as a emotional goodbye between the two characters, and that's really all it needs to be. It didn't need to be some big, impactful, epic song to end the story on. It's a much more emotional note to end the Wicked story on, and I like that. It's obviously not as good as Defying Gravity, though no song in this movie or the previous one is as good as Defying Gravity. That's a pretty high bar to cross. Unfortunately, one problem I have with the musical sequences is that in some of them, the direction kinda feels aimless. There were a few instances of this in the previous film, but in this one it's a lot more present. Like, in some of them the characters kinda just standing around or walking around doing nothing while singing, and that makes it feel kinda dull. Like, there's some exceptions to this. There's a certain musical sequence where the wizard is doing magic tricks, and another one where the characters have sex while singing. There's not too much going on in some of these sequences, but there's some exceptions, which I'm happy with. The film's pacing greatly falters in certain instances, mainly in the second half when it needs to rush through the connections to The Wizard of Oz, with certain scenes and important moments from that movie not even being shown, like when Dorothy lands in Oz. We only get to see the aftermath of that when Glinda sends her off to see the wizard. We really only get to see quick shots of the Wizard of Oz story in this movie, which makes them feel a lot more like just stuff they decide to add in post-production, just quick shots they decide to shoehorn into the story. If anything, this movie is just kind of frustrating to me, seeing the masterpiece it could have been if they'd made some tweaks to the story and fixed that damn lighting. I guess I had a fine time with this one. I still enjoyed the conclusion to Elphaba's story in spite of its clunkiness, and like I said before, everything before Dorothy gets introduced to the story is pretty much on par with the original. Some people are pissed off by this movie, other people absolutely love it. Me, I kind of fall in between. I liked it, I liked parts of it, but I'm also kind of disappointed seeing the masterpiece it could have been if the story didn't fall apart near the end. I will admit, it definitely deserves some Oscar nominations for its set design and costume design and its absolutely stellar performances. I just don't really think it's best picture material as a whole, unlike the previous film, which is unfortunately better in almost every aspect. You theater kids out there, please don't skin me alive for this take. My opinion isn't gospel. If you like this movie, if you loved it, if you thought it was better than the previous film, that's completely fine. This is just what I thought. I liked it, I liked parts of it. It's more of a mixed bag compared to the previous film, which I had mostly positive things to say aside from the visuals. Whereas with this one, not only do I have problems with the visuals, also with the story. I'm sorry guys, but I'm thinking, for now, I'm gonna give Wicked for Good, I'm currently feeling like maybe a 6, 7 out. I'll give it a, you know what? I'm gonna give Wicked for Good a 6.5 out of 10. At least for now. I do plan on watching it again next week, and who knows, maybe it might win me over a bit more and I raise the score. Or maybe it gets a bit worse and I lower it. For now, it stands as a big disappointment that has some good elements, but it's unfortunately drowned out by plenty of messy, clunky story beats that just don't work. I'm sorry guys, Wicked for Good unfortunately doesn't defy gravity like its predecessor, which it lives in the shadow of. Also, side note before the video ends, but I just realized that a lot of the conflicts in this movie and the previous one actually arose because the characters were horny. So I guess the biggest moral takeaway from these movies is no horny.